Okay, so we have an agenda tonight. I'm going to share the agenda. And if you just are coming in, if everybody could just kind of introduce yourselves in the chat. Just a quick, maybe your name, if you want to identify an affiliation, that's fine. You don't have to. And maybe just a really quick statement about, why you decided you wanted to be here tonight. And it's okay if the answer is, I don't know. So thanks, Renee and Glenda, Tyler, Duchi, Mike, Roxanne, Renee. There's a couple of Renees here tonight. So if you can just keep going that, I hope you'll be able to take a look at that. Meanwhile, I want to just introduce some people on the agenda. So before we actually show the agenda, I would like Duchi, can you just kind of raise your hand there? Duchi is WIP's intern and research assistant. She'll be helping out. Macy Lau, can you also say hello? So I don't remember who is taking notes, but one of those two is taking notes. Is that you, Macy, I think? We also have Roxanne Borneman. Roxanne, can you just wave? I'm pointing Roxanne out because Roxanne has an unusual role. She's going to be kind of serving on both she's kind of in a liaison role. She's going to be working with the Marathon County group, with the Lincoln County group, and also with the research team. So she's going to be at all the meetings. So unfortunately, she drew the short straw on that, but thank you, Roxanne. Other members of the research team include Parker, who is a student at UW Eau Claire. Parker, can you give a shout out? There you go. There's Parker. So he is also participating on the research team. And then the research team also consists of Ernest Wade. Ernest, are you there? Okay. And April Lesky-Raychek. And you'll meet some of these people because they have some roles tonight, but I just want to make sure you know who they are. And then David Sparkman, are you here? And then also I want a special guest tonight is Mike Clint North, who's participating also. I guess I'll just call him a member of the research team. He's also in the Marathon County Citizen Advisory Group, but he's really good at research, and so we're really glad to have him here. Mike, if you can just wave. Did I miss anybody? I guess I should also thank, before we go any further, Renee Frederick and John Greenwood for helping to organize this, and the AAC. Is there anything, Renee or John, that you would like to say? Because technically, I guess this is your meeting, so I probably should have acknowledged that up front. But thank you for allowing us to have some time at your meeting. Is there anything either of you would like to make sure the AAC gets out, or any business you want to conduct?
Well, I just want to say thank you to everybody for attending. I'm very intrigued with this conversation, and I'm thinking we're going to make a lot of positive progress. That's my hope.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to the AAC for hosting us tonight. I'm going to share my screen, if I can get this going here, with the agenda. Okay, can everybody see this agenda? Or if you can't, let me know. And I don't know if we have anyone on the phone, so we're doing introductions via the chat. The purpose and goals. So we're going to go over that. We're going to go over very briefly the timeline, since there's a lot of uncertainty on that. We're going to talk tonight about roles, and the one thing that I really want to emphasize is partly the purpose of this meeting is a bit of a recruitment meeting. I want to say that really up front and be very transparent about that, we are really looking for some support from people who live in or work in Lincoln County to help. And we'll go over what we hope we're trying to accomplish, and how people can plug in and help. And one of the main things is something called a citizen advisory group for Lincoln County. And we're hoping that some of you might be interested in joining this group in sort of a more formal way, and we'll talk about that We introduced the research team, and then we'll talk about the role of the research team as well as WIP staff. We're going to have some meeting ground rules that we'll go over tonight. We'll go over that shortly, and then talk about some engagement points, like how people can connect to this project. And then David Sparkman, one of our research team members, is going to lead us through. Tonight is a little bit of a presentation about what's going on, but it's also a little bit of a work meeting. We're going to actually have you take a look at the first, or maybe it's the second or third draft of the survey instrument, and we would like your feedback and like you to start thinking about some of the questions that we propose to ask for this project. And then April Boleski-Raychak will lead us in sort of a feedback or discussion if anyone has questions, and we'll talk about next steps and hopefully schedule a next meeting. So that's the agenda for tonight, and I'm going to now share a different document, which is our PowerPoint presentation, and we'll go from there if I can find it. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint presentation? All right. Okay, so I can move us forward here. All right, I want to start with some acknowledgement of sponsors and partners, and this is a little bit where the story begins. So the story began, and I don't want to make it sound like the origins of the story mean that the work that we're doing in Lincoln County is not important, but the origins of the story were in Marathon County because of the Community for All resolution that came about from some citizens, and I think the Diversity Commission from the county had put forward an idea of a resolution that the county might pass, sort of a non-binding resolution around a statement of inclusion for the county. And some of that, I don't know how much you know about it, but it ended up in kind of a pretty well-publicized kerfuffle around definitions of words, ideas behind what those words meant, and then some both strong and viewpoints for and against the Community for All resolution. Ultimately, I think they put it up for a vote at the county board level, and it did not pass, but it definitely left a lot of negative feelings from many different people and many sides, if you will, and led to a couple of national articles in the New York Times about, that did not paint Marathon County in a very positive light, for sure. I don't think anybody was happy about that on any side of this issue. The reason this project came about is because my board, I have an advisory board, was very alarmed by sort of all that they were seeing in the press and thought, well, our organization has had kind of a history of trying to bring people together to address difficult issues and to have constructive dialogue, sort of similar to what the AAC is doing in Merrill. And at the board meeting, one of our board members happened to be the CEO of Church Mutual, and a proposal was made, rather than try to intervene in some way, because we didn't know what the best way to be constructive would be, was to pause for a moment, and before anyone, or at least in our organization, tried to do anything, to really gather information and find out what is going on. How do people feel about this issue? I think there's this false dichotomy that was created in Marathon County, at least, about, people who lived in sort of the metro area, especially in Wausau, and those who lived in the more rural areas of the county, that, people in one place tended to be, trying to use this as a political ploy to move forward with certain agendas, and then people in rural areas were sort of being painted as racists, and it just became a lot of stereotypes that were not only created but I guess strengthened. And so what we thought might be helpful is to kind of take a strategic pause and gather information to find out, how do people feel about issues of dealing with people who are different from them? How do people feel about belonging in their own community? How do they feel about whether or not their community is welcoming? What is the attitude and perception that the public has based in various parts of our community? So when that proposal was put forward, Church Mutual said, we're going to put up some money and we're going to call it a public investment. So they basically are paying WIPS to take on this study, but they have said pretty clearly that they're not going to attempt to influence the results or have any sort of say in the results. Their name will be on the survey and the final product, but that we have to give them credit for, at least seeing the value of a public investment and trying to add value to this project. One of Rich's stipulations is that, let's find out how the people of Marathon County think, but I also think we need to find out how people in Lincoln County feel as well. And so this is how the project was sort of birthed, and at its origin, therefore, it was decided that the survey and focus groups would involve residents of both Marathon and Lincoln counties. So that's why we're here today. In addition to Church Mutual, the BA and Esther Greenheck Foundation generously provided some additional funding because we knew we didn't have quite enough to carry out the project with just the Church Mutual funding. So that's why they're a sponsor. And then we were able to link up with two kind of, I guess we'll call them umbrella groups, one each in Marathon and Lincoln counties. And in Marathon County, there's kind of a new group that's formed. It's really sort of a coalition of organizations and individuals called Mosaic, which has some goals around issues of diversity and inclusion and making the Marathon County a more welcoming place. And then we're very grateful to be partnering with Aware and Active Citizens of Lincoln County and particularly of Merrill. And so that's why we're, again, here tonight. So we're grateful for those partners and sponsors. So the purpose is really, I guess you could say, the following. One is to create an in-depth demographic profile of Lincoln and Marathon counties. Now, this is not too difficult. We probably don't need a survey to do this. We can look at census data, but we want to include that. We want to know what the profile of our counties and communities are as a way of a baseline for comparing ourselves to maybe how other communities in the state look, and also as a baseline for additional information, which is number two, which is carrying out a thorough study of public perceptions on topics such as diversity, inclusion, welcomeness of communities, belonging, and other potential topics. We'll go more over that with the survey. And then depending on the results of that survey, we'll do some follow-up focus groups, some in-depth qualitative focus groups, and potentially interviews of people in both Lincoln and Marathon counties to see if there's some additional information or some reason and rationale behind some of our findings that we want to spend a little more time developing and understanding. And finally, we'll produce a report, a fairly high-level report, and an executive summary version that we will present publicly, and it will be available for anybody in the public to use as they desire. And I guess the whole point, if you want to go take the next step, is can this information help us as we think about ways that we can come together as communities to improve our community and help people to understand who we are and what we value with regard to these issues. And WIPS's role is not going to be to lead that, whatever that follow-on effort, that's up to whoever wants. If anyone in this group says, I really want to use this data and my organization wants to take a lead in doing something as a result, that's perfectly acceptable and wonderful. So we would encourage that. Timeline, this is very rough, and I've had to revise this because it's kind of a moving target here, but we hope to be refining the survey in January and hopefully finalizing it in February. We'll begin sort of marketing the survey and hopefully launching it in March, closing the survey hopefully at the end of March, beginning survey analysis in April, and then deciding on what we want to focus on with focus groups. And this is very optimistic, but a final report in June. So that's a rough timeline of what we're looking at. And now I'm going to turn it over to Duachi, who's going to share a little bit about some ground rules for our meeting today, and actually all future meetings for what we're calling the citizen advisory groups.
All right, so the purpose of the ground rules is to make sure that everyone here who speaks feels heard and respected. And it's also to make sure that these meetings go smoothly and productively. Before I go through and read the ground rules, I want to mention that if you guys have any questions or clarifications or things you'd like to add or remove, feel free to voice that opinion. And so with that said, the first one is to participate fully, actively, and constructively. Include every individual and be aware of the time occupied when speaking. Listen carefully to understand intent. Respectfully engage one another by asking questions and focusing on ideas, not people. Refrain from personal attacks. Speak from your own experience and avoid invalidating others' stories and experiences. Use inclusive language. Be conscious that body language and nonverbal responses can have the same impact as words. Allow people to acknowledge, address, and learn from mistakes. And lastly, right to pass or withdraw during any discussion.
Okay, thanks, Duachi. And like she said, these are sort of not only for tonight in our discussions or any conversation we have tonight, but also in subsequent meetings. We want to have a set of ground rules that everybody can abide by. So we'll just introduce them tonight and ask that everyone agree to those. If you can't agree, please let me know. You can privately chat me. If you want to add or subtract anything, now would be the time to do that as well. Okay, we can continue to address that. That's a living document that we can, or set of rules that we can continue to modify if needed. As far as roles, I've mentioned that I'm the executive director of WIPS, so I'll start from the bottom and say that WIPS staff's role is to really ensure that this project goes forward, that a study is completed, and that the study is of high quality and hopefully of value to the community, and that we have the deliverables that I mentioned, in particular report summarizing the findings of the survey instrument and focus groups. To that end, we've organized a research team and we've brought in some experts from a lot of different places, and you've already met some of them, I guess, introduced to them, and some of them will be sharing some things tonight and they can share more about their background at that point. And then we have realized, and really if I had to say what's the scariest part about this entire project, it really isn't the design of the survey instrument or the focus group guides or anything like that, or even really meeting tonight and with you, who I don't know very well. It's really the fact that we have no idea if people will want to participate in this study. We have a lot of concerns about whether or not people will see value in if they somehow hear about or receive a survey about issues around diversity, inclusion, belonging, and so on. I mean, these are some very controversial topics, as I'm sure you all know. And so what incentives, what interest do people have in participating? And we've known this from the start, and we know it's a challenge. So one of the strategies we've talked about and why we're meeting tonight is to create what we're calling citizen advisory groups in each county. And part of the purpose of forming these groups is to have more eyes on this project so that it can be as transparent as possible, and two, so that we can have people in the community who live in the communities in which the study is going to take place to be hopefully trusted messengers to help others see the value of this, of participating in this project as well. So hope I'm not giving it all away here, but that's one of the main purposes for the Citizen Advisory Group. And our goal has been to establish 2 of these groups, one in Marathon County, one in Lincoln County. And so you tonight could potentially be that group, or some of you could be part of that group, or maybe you know of people that you think, I think they'd be wonderful for this group. So we're open and ready to receive any help that we can, and we'll talk more about the expectations of the Citizen Advisory Group. But that's where we feel is really critical to help us get the word out about this project. So the CAG will serve as an overall sounding board and advisory group for the study, provide feedback to the research team on the survey instrument design, content, distribution, analysis, and results. So you'll see all of this before the public sees it and have a chance to, provide input and to encourage residents in Marathon and Lincoln counties to participate. The research team will use its expertise to design the survey instrument, to listen and solicit feedback from you and the CAGs, make all final decisions regarding survey content and distribution, analyze the survey results, conduct focus groups, and write the final report. And finally, the WIP staff role is to manage the overall project, coordinate, create and distribute meeting agendas, take notes, and coordinate all communication for this project. Before we get to engagement points, does anybody have any questions, comments, or just burning things they want to say before we move forward? Okay, excellent. I've just stunned everyone into silence. I love it. That was my first goal tonight. Joking aside, I'm now going to turn it over to Parker, who's going to talk about some engagement points for how you, as citizens, residents, and potentially CAG members, can plug in.
Thank you, Eric. Hello, everyone. Starting at the top of this list here. So we do plan on having these meetings monthly. I believe I think the exact date and time is yet to be determined, probably, I think, at the end of this meeting. But they will be once a month. Outside of that, though, we send an invitation out to anyone that's a part of the community advisory groups to attend our weekly research team meetings, which is just obviously the members of the research team and Eric. So feel free to reach out to Eric or anyone else on the team if you would like to be a part of those. Each week, Eric will send out after each meeting, Eric will send out kind of homework, essentially just things that you can do in preparation for the next meeting if you want to be ready and all of that. Communication wise, you feel free to reach out to Eric or someone else here on the team at any point, whether it's email or a phone call. For this next meeting, we are looking for a person who will lead the agenda in the future meeting, similar to how Eric has led this meeting. And I'd like to kind of ask now if anyone would be willing to take that responsibility on for the next meeting.
Yep, I'll take that on.
Fantastic. Thank you, John.
And just so you know, the WIP staff really will help to create the agenda, John, and give that to you in plenty of time. And so you've led plenty of meetings, so I know you know what to do, but we'll just make sure you're not out there on your own, dangling on your own. So we'll be there to help you out.
Great.
Any questions about engagement points? One thing I will say is we really want this process to be absolutely as transparent as possible. It makes it sometimes a little cumbersome, but at the same time, we feel the trade-off is worth it. So as I said, we hold, or as Parker said, we hold weekly research team meetings, and anybody in this community, anybody here tonight is welcome to drop in to that research team meeting. In fact, Mike Klemp North, who's technically not part of the Lincoln County group, is on the Marathon County group, is here tonight. And I know it hasn't been that long because he only started coming recently, but he's become a little bit of a regular at that meeting. And he's absolutely been wonderful to have there. Anyone is welcome to drop by at any time, even if you just want to listen in and hear about, what's going on. You're welcome to join. Just let me know and we'll give you the info to attend. Okay, I think that's it for the PowerPoint. And so I think I'm going to turn it over to Ernest Wade, who's on our research team, and he's going to share. I've suddenly forgotten. Let me pull my agenda up. What are you sharing, Ernest?
So I'm going to talk a little bit just about some of the things that we want to know when we're taking surveys, because I think that's really helpful to keep in mind as we're discussing the different surveys. So one of the things we really want to talk about is that typically when you take a survey, it's an online survey, it takes about 8 seconds to answer a question. So we're looking at about 8 simple questions per minute. So this is really important because we know from research that the longer the survey, the less of a response rate you get. So anything over 20 minutes really begins to see a significant detriment in the response rate. And really even 20 minutes is really long. So we're really aiming for around 15 minutes to make sure that we get enough responses, because typically for an online survey, the response rate is about 33%. So it's really not that high anyway. So we really want to try to make sure that the questions we're asking are not laborsome in terms of the amount of time it takes to answer those questions. So I just want to make sure that we're keeping that in mind as we're going through these questions, because this is our suggestion of the questions. Certainly there's a lot of questions that we could ask. And so we have to keep the scope in mind as it impacts the quality of the responses that we get and the amount of the responses that we get. If we don't get enough responses, it's going to be really hard for us to get meaningful information from that. So I just want to make sure that we're keeping that in mind. Any questions about that? All right, thanks, Eric.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add to that, Ernest, is if you had a chance to open the survey, and don't feel badly at all if you haven't, because I just sent it out maybe a couple hours ago, but we're about to go over it right now, and you'll notice in the headings we've kind of roughly timed each section just so you get a sense of how long it will likely take people to answer. And that's just something that's always going to be in the back of our minds. So thank you, Ernest. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to David Sparkman from the research team, who's going to really take the meeting from here and talk in depth about the survey instrument.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Let me share my screen here. Okay. Let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see this. Okay. So, hey everyone, I'm David. I am a professor at the University of Wisconsin in Eau Claire. I'm a social psychologist who does research and teaches about aspects related to diversity and intergroup relations. So how, lots of different people out there in the world, how do we understand how they feel about people who are different from them, and maybe even figure out ways to get people who are different to like one another and get along. So for starters, I want to strongly suggest that if you have any suggestions about the questions that I'm about to go over, or any feedback about the questions that I'm about to go over, that you wait until I have a chance to get through all of the questions on the survey. We have a dedicated space and time to get your actual feedback and your thoughts and your questions about the survey so far. April is going to handle that after I'm done. I just want to, and I ask this not because I want to squash your questions and not give you a chance to ask questions, but I just want to make sure that we have enough time to get through all of the survey so I can at least explain to you kind of the rationale that the research team had about the questions we're asking and why we're asking those particular questions. So again, if you could just As I go through, if you have questions that pop up in your head, maybe jot them down so that you can remember them later on. If there is a burning question, like maybe something that I'm saying is so unclear that you can't even understand the things that I'm showing you, that's perfectly fine to ask a question then. But otherwise, I hope that we could have that discussion after we get a chance to go through the survey. I also want to remind everybody that the goal, and just reiterate that the goal of this survey is to get a sense of what Lincoln and Marathon counties, the residents of those counties feel in terms of numbers. So the goal of this survey is to get a sense of how people feel about these things that we're about to go through in terms of numbers, rather than residents' actual words and their explanations for how they feel. All of those things are really important to assess as well, but they will be part of kind of the second step here when we do the focus groups. So our ability to have participants kind of write things out and explain how they feel in a really detailed sense is very limited with this aspect of the research project. So most of the questions are number-based questions, and I'll explain what that means in a second. Okay, so the first page here is just this is under revision, and this wording here might not be the official, but we basically want to explain to residents the who and the what and the why for taking this survey. So who are we? Like why or who is the group that's asking your residents to take the survey? What is the survey about? And why do we think it's important that residents do take the survey? So we think it's really important to explain why residents are being asked to take the survey right at the beginning, and just to explain to them that there aren't really any right or wrong answers, that we hope that they'll share their opinions, because we really want to get as many opinions from people as possible, because the more people that we get to respond to the survey, the more meaningful the information will be. So the first set of questions that I'll go through are questions that we call belongingness questions. And I'll just remind you that at the start or the beginning of each page, there's an estimate of how long these questions will take for the average resident or the average participant in the survey. I also want to mention that all of these questions that we'll go through, almost all of them are from prior research. So they're from measures or scales that have been used by other researchers, which means they've been used before, they've been validated to some extent, and there's some benefit to using questions that have already been used by other researchers, because then any responses that we get from residents in Lincoln and Marathon County, we might have an ability to compare those to other research. So most of the things that we'll go through are things that other researchers have used for other similar studies. So the first set of questions are just to get residents' feelings about whether they, at the individual level, whether they personally feel like they belong in their community. And community is a word that we use frequently throughout this survey. And I just want to draw everyone's attention to this part of the instructions here. And we define community as the city, village, or town in which you live. So we've had a lot of discussion about this as a research team, and we think it's particularly important to define community in terms of a geographic location. And again, all of these questions are asking at the individual level whether people feel like they feel accepted or included, whether they feel like they belong as an individual member in the community. Okay, so the focus here is really on how the individual feels as a member of the entire community. The next set of questions, which are quite a bit longer because there are just more of them, again, we're reminding residents that we're asking questions about how they feel about their community, and we define again what we mean by community, this kind of geographic location of the city, village, or town in which you live. And the goal of these next questions, which we call kind of the community welcomingness questions, are more about residents' perceptions of the community. So the questions before this were about the residents' perceptions at the individual level, and these are at kind of the community level. So how do residents feel that the entire community treats or is welcoming toward a bunch of different groups? So one of the things that I want you to kind of think about as we go through these questions is, are there any groups that might be missing here? We have things like people from rural areas or urban areas, different members of racial communities or racial or ethnic communities, women and men, people with disabilities. So you might not have had a chance to look through this in detail, but after this meeting, if you have a chance to look through some of these in more detail and just think about whether there are things that we're missing, or whether there are maybe some groups here that we're asking about that aren't as important to ask about. So kind of keep in mind and think about as we go through these questions, whether there are things missing that we're not asking about, or whether even the questions that we are asking maybe don't feel like they're as good of a fit, or they're not as important, or maybe that they don't get at the spirit of topics or ideas that you think are better representation of Lincoln County. So these are the community welcomingness questions. There are 22 of them. This is kind of the longest set of questions because we really try to think about all the different sub-communities that could be part of Lincoln County and also Marathon County. And these next set of questions are what we call diversity attitudes, or kind of like your beliefs about diversity and what to do with it. People have varying opinions about how we tackle this, the fact that there are a bunch of different people that often live together in one place, and there aren't necessarily right or wrong ways to address that. Some people might think the fact that we're even asking questions about people's race or ethnicity or gender identity or sexual orientation, they might feel like even recognizing those things is the reason why there are so many problems in society. So there are questions here that give people the opportunity to express or share the opinion that we shouldn't be asking about these questions, or we shouldn't be really concerned about diversity in a broad sense. There are questions on here that give people the opportunity to share whether they think, you know, the reason why there might be a problem in society, or the reason why there might be a problem in this county is that we're not focusing on diversity enough, and we should pay even more attention and recognize people for their diverse backgrounds. So all of these questions are framed in terms of race or ethnicity, but they don't have to be. They could be framed in terms of people's gender or sexual orientation or their disability, for example. But all of these questions here are just questions about different beliefs that people might have about this idea of diversity and what we do about it. The next page here are asking questions about intergroup trust and also intergroup anxiety. So from from a research standpoint, these are typically some of the two of the most important features, or two of the most important variables that can give you a lot of information about whether members of your community or groups within a larger community are getting along. As levels of trust in other people who are different from you, as those levels of trust get stronger and stronger, you're going to be less likely to have conflict in your community. You're going to have groups that are getting along rather well. So one of the reasons why we think asking about whether people trust those from other racial or ethnic backgrounds in their community, and we have it listed here as racial or ethnic backgrounds, but it could be other diverse groups instead. These are just items to give you a flavor for, or give you a sense of what these questions could look like. The reason why we're asking about trust is we could get a sense of how much people trust those from other groups in their community. If trust is really low, then we can document that and maybe figure out ways to increase trust. And the same thing for intergroup anxiety. So as levels of anxiety, so this is basically when you're with people who are different from you in your community, does it make you feel uncomfortable? Does it make you feel awkward? Does it make you feel worried? And the extent to which people feel really anxious about other people in their community who are different from them, as those levels of anxiety get higher and higher, it means there's a greater likelihood that there's going to be conflict, and there might be feelings of prejudice or discrimination. So one of the reasons why we want to ask about anxiety is to really document and see whether, like, what level of anxiety exists in the community. Maybe levels of anxiety are really low. But if levels of anxiety about people who are different from you in your community are really high, it would be good to document that and see whether that's the case, because there are some interventions, or there are some things that could be done in the community level to kind of reduce feelings of anxiety and increase the likelihood that people can get along with others in the community. So this is basically, we've gotten to the last page of the survey at this point, and I know that this has taken a long time, and I appreciate your attention. The last page of the survey is just a demographics page. So this asks the resident to give information about themselves. So where do you live? Where do you work? How old are you? What is your gender? What's your race? Sexual orientation, your highest level of education, and then some other questions about political party leanings. And the main benefit of asking questions about demographics is so we can get a sense for what types of people are completing the survey. And it also will give us a chance to compare residents' responses between groups within the community. So we might be able to see, well, what's the level of feeling like you belong when you compare men to women? What's the level of community welcomingness when you compare people who live in kind of rural areas to urban areas? And this is one of the benefits that we get by asking some of these questions on the demographic page. And then finally, there'll be a section at the end of the survey where we do give residents the opportunity to share any thoughts or explain any of their answers or provide any feedback about the survey. We don't want to completely shut out residents from having the chance to explain themselves using words, but we want to make sure that we are mindful and minimize the opportunities to do this, because it can take people a long time to explain themselves. And the more we ask them to explain themselves, I think the less likely they'll want to go all the way through the survey. So we do give them a chance at the end to explain themselves in words. And this is something that we mentioned in the introduction of the survey to them. So with that, I am going to, I'll leave my screen shared here so that we can go back to anything that you might have questions about. But now I think I'm going to turn it to April to help us field some of the questions that you might have, or suggestions that any of you might have, or feedback that you might have about anything we've discussed related to the survey so far. And I'll probably chime in, and other members of the research team might chime in as well to help answer some of the questions that you ask.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Before we start, I just want to ask Eric, what is our timeline? How much time do we have to talk about this draft? You're muted.
Yeah, thanks. Only once a day. I think in theory, we said the meeting was going to last up to an hour and a half. And just so everyone's not panicked about it, future CAG meetings, when we have this kind of meeting in the future, will be limited to 1 hour. But tonight, we just felt like we wanted to give ourselves a little more time because there's a lot of introductory stuff to do, and as well as some initial feedback. So we really have until about 7.
Okay, so with that in mind, and knowing that we do want to leave a few minutes at least at the end in case we get really involved in our discussion, leave a few minutes for us to take stock and plan for the next meeting. So maybe I'll just start by opening it up. This survey has been through a few drafts already, but we also were, it's largely contingent on what these citizen advisory groups see as the important task at hand. And how do you feel about this initial set of questions? You're welcome to use the chat, by the way. If you don't want to put a comment out for everybody, you can chat directly to me or David or Eric or Ernest.
I'll just make a comment. This is Renee. As far as surveys go, I think it's well written, if that's the word I want to use. Just going through it and just, reading it myself, it sort of got me thinking, which I think is a good part of it for anybody who is taking the survey. So I guess that's my comment for right now.
Thank you, Renee. I agree with you. I think that's really, as soon as you give people questions that make them think about what's going on in their community, I think that's exactly what we're after.
This is Dave Johnson. I'd like to ask a question.
Please.
Is there any kind of a minimum age limit on this survey?
Eric, I'm guessing we'll need to be 18.
I think it's a great question, and it came up at the Marathon County version of this meeting. And I know that we sort of put it on our back burner of like, okay, we need to decide this. Right. We'd love some input. I personally feel like there are young people who would like to participate in this survey. And I think, April, I hope I don't want to like mess up anybody's view here, but I think I would like to see at least 16-year-olds and above participate, but that's my personal preference. So I would love some feedback here from others.
Okay, Eric, my reason for asking is I have a daughter who is 19 in college and is adopted from China. I think when she was in high school, she would have had a perspective that most people in this community do not have. And I would like to see that from other people that are very much of a minority in the community, be able to express their opinion.
This is Renee Krieger. David, thank you for sharing that. I would agree. I think we would be doing a disservice if we're not including the youth voice in our survey. And even if you want to separate out somehow an age of 16 to 19 versus 20 and older, that demographic piece might be very important. I did put in the chat just one real quick grammar change to number 10. But overall, I agree that I really like how this survey is laid out, and I like how it does make you think. And I like the opportunity for people to be able to really challenge their own thoughts and viewpoints and feel comfortable in expressing how they feel about things.
Thanks, Renee, for pointing that out. I appreciate it.
Also, I wanted to follow up on age. One thing we have in here right now, I think, is probably age categories, and those are often used to protect those who are older and don't want to write down their exact age. But when we get into those young folks, it is kind of nice to have that exact age, like 16 to 19. There's a lot of growth that's happening there. 19, 20, 21. So do we have to use, can we use just put in your age? Or do you think that we need the groupings?
I think the way we have it on there is to
Write your age, I think,
write
right?
your age. The
Yeah.
lines
Okay,
aren't
good.
showing up. There we go. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, to write in your age.
Okay.
My only question about age, and maybe this is just the perspective of doing research with those who are under 18, is that they, like, from an ethics point of view, they tend to be seen as minors who need the consent of an adult in order to participate in a research study. But that's just my perspective of, like, having to do research with individuals from a university setting.
And and I think that how do I put this? I think we fall into this category, April. I'm kind of sidling to you for a minute about who is sponsoring the survey, who's owning the survey, what are the purposes of the survey, and ultimately, we're not using this for publishable research purposes. So I don't think we're necessarily under the same stringency. However, I still think I agree that we want to make sure we're protecting people. And so we have to be careful about protecting anonymity, obviously, number one. Number two, I agree about age appropriateness. And we may have to, if we are all in agreement somehow that we need 16 and above, we may need some permission at the front end of the survey. Like if you are, under 18, before you take the survey, you need to have your parent initial this or something. We can build in some safeguards for things like that, or try to.
Well, you get an honest answer that way. Some younger people may not want their parents to know how they feel because they may not necessarily agree with their parents.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that for other projects, we have been able to use language that is, generally the survey should be written for easily to handle younger participants anyway, but just including language of informed consent, you can stop any time, there's no penalty, including that language, even though it's not considered research by the typical research definition that we go through, David. I think we'll be okay. But
well, and if somebody wants to use the data for publication, it'll go to their academics IRB. And so then that's going to be the evaluation on that level. If we're doing the research on behalf of the organizations here, if someone wants to use it, right? So, and the task force, the police task force, right? I look at that as ripe data. I sit here and say, well, I would publish it under UW Platteville, but I'd need to go to their IRB and have that as secondary data saying, look, this is the data set. And that would capture, in my opinion, the ethical concerns we're bringing up.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And then that IRB it's up to them to determine, can they use this data? Are the people who took the survey protected? That kind of thing. So, we'll be doing anybody a favor by doing the best we can to meet those kind of human subjects guidelines as best we can. As far as Dave's concerned about parents like looking over the shoulder of youth, that's definitely a possibility regardless. My thought about sort of getting consent, if we thought that was necessary for the 16 to 17-year-old range, would be having something on the front end, so not on the back end. So they're not like reviewing the survey necessarily, but on the front end, are they giving permission for the child to take the survey? If so, they can initial right on page 1. And I guess it would be up to the parent and child to decide if they're going to, do that, allow that independence or not. And it's nothing we can control, but we couldn't control it anyway, right?
Yeah, yeah. So we can return to age. Renee, did you have a question?
Yeah, I don't know if I missed it. I very well could have missed the question, but do we have a question on here about how long they've lived in their community?
Actually, I don't think we do, which is a really good point.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, great point, Renee. We do not have that. It's probably pretty important.
Yes.
Especially because in other research in Marathon County, we've gotten quite an overrepresentation, perhaps, or just a substantial representation of those who've lived longer in the community. And duration may be relevant for a sense of belongingness and welcomingness.
Yeah, thank you for that, Renee. That's a good point.
Yeah, we'll add that in. What else?
April, I have a subjective reaction to the survey I'd just like to share. With regard to interagency trust, which I think is a core issue, if we go up to that area, it's something that I think we all want to increase, obviously. But I'm wondering, with regard to intergroup anxiety, I have a reaction to it in this regard, that I think it's an extremely important item. But I'm wondering, it seems like it's an emotional, it's an emotional question. Would there be, and I'm just throwing this out for your consideration, obviously, but would there be another area with regard to something like comfort? What's your comfort level? Which is a little bit more emotionally oriented, but that's just totally a subjective reaction on my part. But anyway, I just wanted to throw it out.
So John, when you look at those adjectives like, anxious, comfortable, at ease, given that some are worded positively and some are worded negatively, does that change it? And
well, if we look at those 8 words, we've got anxious, awkward, worried, fearful, and afraid. And I think we're kind of weighting it in that direction. And I'm wondering if we're leading the survey person, who's taking that survey, if we're leading them a little bit. And I guess that I know that I have some anxiety with regard to this issue. However, I'm also interested in exploring what makes me feel more comfortable with regard to various people that I may meet in the community. So that's just my reaction. But yeah, I think that I think those are good things to be able to look at for the person taking the survey. But I'm wondering if it's a little bit leading. For example, even with the 8 adjectives or 8 words that we've got there.
Yeah, John.
That's a good catch, John.
Yeah, and you make me think about the adjectives like curious, which is, I think,
right.
positive, and plenty of people may feel anxious and curious at the same time.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's worth considering getting rid of maybe one of these, because it is weighted a bit more to the negative kind of anxious side of things. If you want to like pick out teams of 5 to 3, 5 kind of more negative, anxious words and 3 positive words. So we can consider maybe getting rid of one of the anxious words and replace it with something that's more positive. And we could even analyze responses separately too. Look at anxiety and comfort as kind of separate things.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, David, because it's sort of like, let me consider both options or both sides of the table a little bit. But that, again, that's my very subjective reaction to it.
No, I think it's a great point. Thank you.
Yeah, fearful and afraid and worried and anxious are all very close to synonymous. In the personality literature, they're often used synonymously. I don't think confident and comfortable are synonymous in the same way that fearful and afraid are. So thank you, Hans. Well, I think we need to look at this carefully. So we have a broader issue also to consider. But before I broach that, I'm wondering if there are other thoughts on what you've seen so far. Okay, so one of the issues that we were wondering about is this draft or something like it is what, 13 minutes? Is that what we have, David? It's about 13 minutes, and it is primarily focused toward understanding feelings about race and ethnicity as a primary aspect of diversity. But as you saw on that third page where, we said, how welcoming is your community toward this people of this group, members of this group, members of that group, members of that group. We kind of need to understand your impressions of how important it is to get at maybe intergroup trust or intergroup anxiety or more specific attitudes toward various types of diversity besides race and ethnicity, or just leave it as focused there.
With the trade-off being, right, that it could lengthen the survey to the point where people will take it in diminishing rates.
Right, like as you look at this, are you like, oh my gosh, we should be asking the same exact set of questions about this, members of this group? But yes, if we did that, then the number of items would go up. So we're wondering about initial impressions in that regard.
I guess let me ask a question for clarification. Are you asking if you were to add certain questions that it would get too long? Yeah. And is there a possibility of perhaps modifying the entire document to some extent to perhaps include some other concepts, but again, be mindful of that 13-minute, draft time? Is that what you're asking about?
That is. So let me elaborate, John, in thinking about what you mentioned about intergroup trust. I look at those items and I think, okay, well, we have 6. And this is a set of items that have been used, as David mentioned, by previous researchers. So the 6 items are meant to be aggregated, right? So if you see people responding consistently to all 6, you can take the average of their response to those 6 items. But if we wanted to ask a couple of items about how trusting people feel toward people of other sexual orientations, or do we want to know if people feel that those who are of of, you know, other social classes, or who live in different environments, like, or have different political ideologies. What is their intergroup trust there? If there is this, you know, if there's a feeling that we really need to be asking about not just race and ethnicity, but also about people of different groups of this dimension, then we need to figure out how to balance the number of items in each subscale in order to have that more specificity in terms of identity group. Does that clarify a little bit?
Somewhat. Again, I'm going back to my idea with regard to, I mean, you have probe questions, right, that you're using in the survey. And I have to confess, I'm a little bit more oriented towards the social emotional reactions, because for me, the topic is pretty emotional in the sense that it's there and it comes out at you. And I'm thinking that just my bias, I would possibly modify the survey a little bit to, again, honor that 13-minute time frame. I would look at perhaps another section on intergroup comfort or whatever. It's got to be, I think it's got to be some sort of an emotional, evocative word, just like as soon as you say intergroup anxiety, holy man, you know, there it is. And it's, so I guess I would vote for you considering looking at, again, honoring the 13-minute timeline, but perhaps moving something in there with regard to an emotional question that gets at the positivity of relationships. Again, I think both of them get at the trust issue, the inner group trust issue, which is conceptually what we want. But then what about emotionally? And I think that, and I'm kind of elaborating here a little bit, but I think that as you get into the focus group aspect of the study, that this might give you some information that you want to delve into more in the focus group context.
Yeah, thank you, John. I think one thing too for us to keep in mind is that our participants are not going to see these headings like intergroup anxiety or intergroup trust. They're just going to see the introductory language and the questions, but they're not going to see those.
Oh, they're not.
No, it's kind of like if I were measuring, you know, sadism, I wouldn't label it sadism. I'd just ask the questions. So,
Okay.
you know,
Example.
I hear you. Yeah.
I think if what I'm hearing you say, John, is correctly, like if I'm interpreting it correctly, I think you still have a point or a suggestion about, are there other ways that we might be able to measure things about how people in the community feel in more of a positive light? Is that kind of another, maybe a thread of something that you're thinking about, that some of these are really, they're very emotional and kind of framed more negatively, like how, you know, how anxious are you, how threatened are you, how untrustworthy do you feel, and maybe we can consider tapping into positive, some aspect of positive relations between people or between groups.
Yes, I think that's it, David. I think that the fact that we can get along with each other in certain ways, we maybe quote from different family backgrounds, et cetera, however we want to describe that. But yeah, definitely on the emotional level, why do I feel comfortable talking with this person? Well, if we explore that too, I think that's helpful, at least helpful from my perspective. Again, you know, it's such a complex issue in the sense that when you were talking about, I think, David, I think you were talking about, you know, the diversity attitudes, recognizing these categories exacerbates the problem. But on the other hand, some people might say, well, I want to celebrate, my group or where I'm coming from, et cetera. So, yeah. But I thanks for, reflecting that to me. I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, thank you. We've talked about, or earlier today, we talked about and might revisit the possibility of asking questions or maybe more questions. There are a couple of questions in the demographic section that I didn't really get to, but asking more questions about just how often people interact with others who are different from them and the extent to which those interactions are like positive and pleasant interactions. So maybe that might be a way to get a sense for, the level of positive interactions people are having with others who are different from them as well. Because certainly those positive interactions might be taking place in the community, and it would be good to be able to measure and document those if it's true.
Yes,
Yeah, great.
I agree. Thank you.
Right, the floor's open for other thoughts.
So this is Renee Frederick. I guess a thought or just thinking about your intergroup trust questions. To me, you're very, on the community welcoming, you have everybody listed, but on the intergroup, you sort of just smooshed everything together a little bit. And I know you're worried about that time factor, but maybe, a thought of just getting, depending on how much information, where you want to get the information, what information you want to have at the end, is maybe to break these apart, like question 1 into more of most people from other religious groups, try to be unfair, and then maybe more of sexual orientation. If you broke it apart a little bit, sort of comparing it with your community welcoming, but not as many categories. It's just a thought. To me, you get a little bit more information if people are feeling they're more worried about somebody's religious background more than their nationality.
Yeah, because if we ask these questions as they're written, we'll have a lot of really good responses, and by that I mean like really reliable and concise responses about race or ethnicity. And maybe people in the community have a lot of trust toward those from other racial or ethnic backgrounds, but trust in other groups is really low. But if we don't ask about those other groups, we won't know. So maybe there's benefit to picking one or two of these questions and asking about it in terms of other types of diversity might give us some important information too.
Yeah, thank you, Renee. I like that idea. I actually, the more specific I think about it, the more I get worried, because I feel like if I had a heyday with this, the survey would get really long. I think some people will have a hard time with other racial ethnic groups, and they'll be like, which racial ethnic groups? Will they think about the first ethnic group, that they interact with, and only those? Or will they, I don't know. It's hard. We could be splitting hairs for a long time if we get into too many sub-communities.
And maybe it's worth saying out loud that, we don't want to portray this survey or the study in general as some kind of, wonderful silver bullet that's going to give us all information, all answers to whatever issues are plaguing our communities, or the positives for that matter. It's really designed as a snapshot of perceptions. And maybe part of the value that I think I neglected to say, though, is that, if we design this well enough, effectively enough, and I think it speaks to what you're all saying about broadening it somewhat, we can re-administer the survey in 3 years or 5 years, under the assumption that the community has done something specific to address these issues, and we can find out, well, has anything changed over time? So I would think we'd want an instrument that isn't just for the moment, but is looked at a little bit longer term, which I think, speaks to the value of broadening some of the questions a little.
And it starts the conversation. Like you said, we can't, if we make it too long, no one's going to take it, but we need a place to start. And this is a great place to start. And Eric, like you mentioned, that doing another survey down the road, realizing that there are some areas that we need to take a look at. But this right here is a place to get that conversation going, and that's what we need.
So I just want to throw a conversation out there for food for thought, and we can maybe discuss this at length further at the next meeting. But I have to wonder how skewed of a response we'll get at this time that we might not have had 3 years ago, that we might not have 5 years from now, simply based on what's occurring right now with the refugees. And I don't know if there's a way to include a piece of that into this. And I say that in part because when I'm out and about and having conversations that are very difficult to have, I hear things from people around the conversation around the refugees that I wouldn't have otherwise heard a couple years ago, ever.
Yeah, really quickly. I'll note this might not address the concern, which I think is a really good concern, because basically what we might be doing is we might be taking a snapshot in time, one point in time of Lincoln County and Marathon County, of a really unique period where refugees are beginning to settle, or I'm not really sure of the background details, but there's talk about the possibility that refugees might come here. And what would that mean for the survey results? And would it be any better or any worse if we did this two years from now, or 2 years before? Which is a really great point. I'll just mention that we did consider that, and we have a question about refugees that we can measure at least, and maybe be able to see over time in 2 years or 3 years from now whether that changes at all. But yeah, I think your concern is a good one and a real one, because this is a really unique event that might have an impact on how people respond to the survey, that they might not have responded that way if it was done 2 years before. But I'll let Eric talk, because maybe he knows more about the background than I do.
No, I don't, but I am kind of curious from the folks in Lincoln County if you're hearing a lot of this in Lincoln County. And I don't even know, like, my impression was that these folks are getting settled in Wausau, but I may be totally off base. Maybe there are some coming to Lincoln County. Maybe it doesn't matter if they're coming to Wausau or Lincoln County. The sense is that they're coming to our area. So I'm kind of curious what the Lincoln County folks think about this.
I am happy to share some of the perceptions that have been shared with me, but I kind of wanted to hear from others if anyone else is brave enough to speak.
All right, I'll speak. Unfortunately, I've heard comments made about you don't want those kind of people here. And that's very unfortunate, but it's a reality. And it says something about the community the history of the community with minorities and different people.
Thanks, David, for sharing that. So I've had a few conversations with some very different demographic groups. So in talking with people who have been really involved and exposed to some of the social impact with the Hmong refugee movement and the history and the learning behind it, have a lot of concerns, I think, about the reality of having to go through that transitional phase as a community. And I think Lincoln County, even though we're not a recipient of a group, I think the refugees do tend to move out of Wausau when they start to feel comfortable and they seek other job employments, or they have some troubles with, you know, just like any of us, if I have an issue with my child and they need to get away from their peer group, I'm going to move. So there is that transition piece, and we do see a lot of that come to Lincoln County, even though we're only a half hour away. And then you have conversations with a demographic group who never really had any of the adverse experiences with the Hmong refugee, and they don't understand why this is going to be a problem, but they do look at it as a tax concern. So I've had both of those sides of the conversations. I've been trying to navigate it the best I can, but I'm one voice amongst a group of many. And that's all we can continue to do. But I don't think the concerns of Lincoln County residents are any different than those of Marathon County. I just think it's like talking to somebody from Stratford. It's Marathon County, but it's really, you know, half hour, 45 minutes from Wausau still. We're no different. We're just north.
So April got booted out. I'm not sure she's back yet. Sorry, April. I'm partly saying this because we're kind of reaching our 7 o'clock hour. And so I'm wondering if this is an appropriate time to kind of talk about next steps. And this has been a wonderful conversation. So I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank especially again, the AAC, Renee, John, any other executive committee members or any members generally for participating and allowing and hosting us, allowing us to, you know, present to you this project. So here's the quote unquote homework / you know, I guess action item. Number one would be, are you interested? Is anyone in this group interested in participating on sort of in a more formal regard with by joining the so-called citizen action group from Lincoln County? And the commitment there I sent you guys, I hope you all received it. If you didn't, let me know, or maybe John can send it out to you, but I sent you some documents today. And one of them is sort of an overview of the expectations of what does that mean, you know, if I serve on this citizen action group, what do I have to do? What's the commitment? Basically, it's, you know, we'll try to meet about once a month for the duration of the project, so about 6-7 months, and for 1 hour. And, you know, most of the stuff will be in between those meetings. There might be some homework. So for example, this is sort of getting very down to the weeds here, but this is some homework that would be for between now and next meeting. We'd like to have you take a look at the survey and appreciate what you've looked at and commented on so far. Provide any other feedback that you think is relevant. Maybe send via email to David, to myself, April, Ernest, any of the team members, because we will be collecting. We've been collecting feedback already from folks in Marathon County, so we're still open to collecting different feedback. And I thought tonight there was some outstanding feedback, so we really appreciate that. So it just leads me to believe that there's more good ideas out there. So we'd love to have you, you know, if you haven't had a chance to look it over carefully, just to look it over, send any ideas that you didn't hear that you have. So that's one example of some homework that we would have if you were part of the Citizen Action Committee. We'd have you sort of, you know, do this. Another homework item that that I really have asked the Marathon County people to think about, like you to think about, the thing that I mentioned at the front of the meeting that scares us as a research team the most is, how do we get people to participate? What is the elevator speech? What is the rationale? Like, I mean, obviously we have some words on paper about the purpose of the project, but how can we convince people that it really is valuable for them to participate? And we'd really love you to think about that. And what is the type of language that we can use that would be most effective? And, you know, we were told by some Marathon County, some very wise folks in Marathon County, that it isn't just the words of the message, it's the messenger and whether or not they're trusted. So we know that's a big part of it. And so part of the role of being a CAG member also would be to, or a participant, let's say, is to really be an advocate for the survey and to help people understand the value of it and participating. So those are the sort of the immediate homework. And those are examples also of what we sort of are hoping to get from people who participate in the CAG group. So if you're interested, I don't know how you want to do it. You're welcome to talk to John or Renee. If you want them to pass the message on, you're welcome to, you know, share or mention it to me or any of the team members directly. And we'd absolutely love to have as many of you as want to participate as possible. And maybe you don't want to participate at that level. Maybe you just want to kind of be in the loop, but you don't want to be that active. Let us know. We can keep you on the email list, and, you know, and just make sure that you're aware of what's going on. And I'll just ask my research team colleagues, did we miss anything that we also wanted to share before we conclude?
No, I just want to say, Eric, just because I don't like leaving things hanging. Renee, thank you for your comment. I know we kind of just left it there, but it's a really good comment, and we will certainly take that back and give it some thought. So thank you for bringing that up.
I'm sorry, my battery died, and then I think I was getting back in when Eric said something and mentioned my name. So can you tell me what the comment was?
Oh, I just mentioned that you had been booted out, and I was going to turn the meeting back over to you.
Okay.
Just to
you'll refresh me later on Renee's thought.
Yeah, I think Macy's taking notes, and we're recording this, so we definitely have that. And I agree. Thank you, Renee, and thank you, Ernest, for mentioning that. The next steps then would be we'll put out probably a doodle poll, and you know, try to line up a meeting where, you know, at least the bulk of the people that are interested can participate. We know it's never a perfect unanimous participation, but even if you can't make the next meeting, don't feel like that means that you can't, you know, plug in later. We'd certainly love to have you. So with that, we just want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it, and hope that some of you will participate.
Hey, Eric?
Yes.
Just a comment to the group. You know, if you want to email me or call me as well, I would be open to that too, because we're obviously at kind of a crucial time in the sense of developing this advisory group, and I hope you're interested. But and I'm sure Renee is open to if people want to talk with her as well.
And I'll send an email that'll basically just prompt everybody in this meeting to, you know, maybe share, yes, I'm interested, no, I'm not interested, keep me on the email list, etc. And this is no guilt, so don't feel badly if right now is not a good time in your life for participating. That's perfectly acceptable, and it doesn't mean that we'll think any less of you, unless you continue your association with John. I'm joking. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.